Okay, so in terms of discussion here, my background is primarily in USPSA. Rick kind of plays a little bit in USPSA and IDPA both. I don't have as much experience in IDPA. So USPSA has today, I think, 6 divisions. So you're looking at open, limited, limited 10, production, single stack, and revolver. Back in the early days of IPSC, there were really 2 divisions, limited and open. And open is typically what you're considering your race guns. If there was like a Formula One or a MotoGP type of a gun, it's open. It's basically pushing the limits. There are not a lot of restrictions. And you can typically define an open gun by having a compensator and or a red dot sight on the gun. And this is really where people are really pushing the limits in terms of things. But open guns are also rather expensive. Limited guns are very similar to open guns, except they don't have the red dot sight or the compensator, but they do typically feature high capacity magazines. The next division is limited 10, which was basically born from the assault weapons ban for basically the fact that nobody could get high capacity magazines anymore legally. Not to say that they weren't making them. So the restrictions in limited 10 was a 10-round magazine. The next division that was also born at that time was production. Production are basically your stock, for the most part, out-of-the-box guns that you would typically buy at any gun store, again limited to 10-round magazine capacity. After that, there is single stack division, which was actually created a few years ago, and that is typically 1911 style, or actually 1911 pistols. Frame pistols. There's some variations in size and whatnot, but it does have to be a 1911. So your SIG is a 220 or whatever it is, which is technically a single stack 45, does not fall into the single stack division.
Legal, even
right.
though it is a single stack 45.
Right, right. And that really has catered to a lot of the people who have, your typical Colt 1911. Seems like almost everybody does have one. So it was a good division to come out and play in that. And then the last division, which I have no experience whatsoever, is revolver division, obviously for the people who are crazy and like to see things go around in circles. So, and some of these divisions actually, it's kind of a good question of whether limited 10 and more production was really in response to the pushback that IDPA was really kind of born from of having non-practical equipment. I'll let you go ahead and talk about the IDPA kind of crossover of some of the divisions there.
Yeah, I think the new rules that replaced the 2 divisions in USPSA of limited and open with first 3 new divisions, and then a couple of years ago a 4th new division were kind of born out of the same conditions that created IDPA, in that you had a lot of people who maybe want to play, but they don't necessarily want to buy a $3,000 pistol just to kick the tires. And so when IDPA formed, their divisions were somewhat similar to the divisions that were added at about the same time in USPSA, and that there were the USPSA production division, which required a 10-round magazine, no more than 10 rounds capacity, and approximately a 9mm level of power. Is essentially the same set of equipment rules that IDPA adopted for what they call their stock service pistol division. And the 2 are essentially equivalent. I mean, they're almost identical. If you have gear that's legal for IDPA stock service pistol, it's also legal for USPSA production. And similarly, the equipment that is prevalent in IDPA custom defensive pistol division, which is essentially everybody shooting a single stack 45, in a lot of ways, the USPSA single stack rules kind of cribbed from the IDPA custom defensive pistol rules. So the idea that the 2 sports differ based on equipment to a certain extent is true. But if you shoot a revolver, or you've got your Glock 17 or a single stack 45, those are guns that can be used with equal success in both sports, because the rules are essentially set up in those divisions for those specific types of guns. You're not at a disadvantage. A lot of times somebody will say, I don't want to get involved in USPSA because I don't have an expensive gun.
I think that's kind of a myth that people have about both sports, more so about USPSA, is that you've got to have an expensive gun to compete. And I think the point here that we're trying to make is is that you can go out and literally whatever you have right now, as long as it's 9 millimeter and larger, so your 380s won't apply, but 9 millimeter and larger, basically there is a sport for you to compete in. And you may not be interested in the competition side of things, but like we were saying earlier, it's a great place to improve your gun handling skills and to become more proficient. And that's really, for a lot of people, what it's all about. I mean, we've seen newer shooters and they come out and they're really interested in the sport, but I think they're actually looking at this as a means for really just improving their shooting abilities and shooting techniques. And they really don't care about the competition side. So I would encourage all of you to go out, and if you have a Glock or a 1911 or nearly any box stock gun that's 9 millimeter and larger, go out, get involved. In terms of the websites for that, idpa.com is the IDPA website, and USPSA.org is a USPSA website. So I would encourage all of you to go and check both of those sites out, websites out, for more information about the two sports. I think these days the thing that really differentiates IDPA and USPSA is more the course design and what you're doing, so much that the shooting stages and whatnot.
Yeah. USPSA has evolved into a freestyle sport where the creativity is kind of in the mind of the shooter. They're presented with a shooting problem, and it's up to them to find the most efficient way to solve it. IDPA, the creativity is more in the mind of the course designer, and it's up to the competitor to execute the course of fire as written by the designer. Some people say, they miss the creativity, the idea that as the shooter, I can determine the best way to shoot a course of fire, and that's why I prefer USPSA to IDPA. IDPA is driven by scenarios, and so there's not really much room for creativity if the scenario involves, let's say it's all the courses of fire are supposed to be based on plausible defensive situations. So they revolve around a carjacking or a home invasion or something. And there's not much freedom to determine how you want to approach a situation when the sequence of events is somebody kicks in the front door, then you have to react to it. Well, you can't shoot them before they kick in the front door, which is what the IPSC shooter would like to do, ideally, just avoid the situation. But yeah, that's essentially the difference. Is that?
Well, I think you just said the key thing there: avoid the situation.
Yeah, exactly.
Not everything is a nail waiting to be pounded by a hammer.
Exactly.
Exactly. Sometimes the best thing to do is just not be there or get away if you can. But obviously there are times that you can't.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that the shows we're going to get into in much more detail is how the two sports differ, and really I think they're very much more alike than they are different.
True.
But it's sort of as they say, the devil's in the details, and so we're going to get into those details and how they differ. And I've as Steve mentioned earlier, I've been an enthusiastic competitor of both sports for the last 10 years, and a lot of times I'll see the complaint about one will be, oh, it's not like the other one. And I said, well, that's like hating volleyball because it's not like basketball. I mean, they both have a round ball. You're swatting it around. They're very similar. But, we'll be going into the differences and the similarities in much more detail in future episodes.
And when I heard to bash either one.
Much.
Which seems to be, or had been, at least in the past, an ongoing issue between IPSC and IDPA is that, people always complained about one or the other. And
now we all just try to get along.
Right, as much as possible.
That's the summary of our show. You've met Steve and I. What we're going to do here on Power Factor, if you have questions or comments about the show, our website is powerfactorshow.com. If you want to submit questions or comments, what you'd like to see in future episodes, you can contact us at powerfactorshow@gmail.com. In the next episode, we're going to discuss equipment, both IDPA and USPSA, how to get involved in the selection process. A lot of people think, oh God, I'm nervous. I don't want to go out there with crappy gear. And so we're just going to discuss everything that'll get you off on the right foot. You don't want to have a box of unused holsters under your workbench like everybody else does. So we're going to try to solve that.
But you'll eventually end up someday with anyway.
So stay tuned for episode 2.